you come at this from experience because you spent a lot of time in corporate America.
Actually, I always thought I was a really good corporate girl, climbing that corporate ladder and wanting to get all the awards and the promotions. And I always thought that's where I'd be.
Then all of a sudden, something triggered you where you said, no, not going to do this anymore.
My last corporate job was with peak performance coach Tony Robbins, where I was the director of content development. So I was working for Tony for about 6 years, and I was getting paid well. I got to travel. I was a director, so I had a team around me. And on paper, it was a really good job. I had also just gotten married and was traveling all the time. Never was seeing my husband and never was at home. But here's what happened. Tony decided to do a focus group of some type, and he brought in a bunch of online business owners. Now, they needed someone to take notes for the meeting. So this is very humbling. I was brought in to take notes. I sat at a side table and all these guys came in. They were all men. And they sat at this big oak table in our offices in San Diego, California. And Tony said, guys, tell me about your businesses, because Tony was getting more into the online space. So they went around and they talked about what they did. Now, these guys were in all these different areas like real estate, relationship building, investing, so many different markets. But they all talked about freedom. They were working when they wanted, where they wanted, how they wanted. They were busting through any glass ceiling, although it was like beyond anything I've ever heard about the kind of money they were making and the kind of impact they were making. And I realized for the first time in my life, I have never been free. And so I took the worst notes of my life that day because I just wanted to hear what they were saying. I didn't really understand what they were doing, but I did understand they had a lifestyle of freedom. I did understand they were making a lot of good money and a lot of good impact. And for the first time, I looked back at my life and I thought, I've always had a boss. My first boss was my dad. He was very strict, his way or the highway. So I grew up with this dad that was essentially my boss. Then I get into the corporate world. I've always had bosses. I've never, ever called the shots. And so that was that turning point that I thought, I don't know what these guys are doing, but I'm going to figure this out. I need to be my own boss.
And did you decide at the time that there was something to being your own boss that you pick up somewhere that had not been shared with you? Because saying you want to be your own boss and then having the skills, the abilities, the support systems, the intuitions, the insights, the understandings to actually be your own boss are two very different things. Everybody wants to be their own boss, but being able to do it successfully are two very different things.
In that moment, if you put me back into that meeting, I had no idea how to be my own boss. And I sure as heck didn't have the confidence to do so. I had done well in corporate and I wasn't a vice president or a big shot over there, but I had done well enough. So yeah, in that moment, no, I did not know how I was going to do this, nor did I really believe that I was capable. But here's why I know that I had to figure out how to make it work. I just wanted something more so than I wanted security or comfort. And I really, looking back, I've thought about this a lot. I was secure in that job, regular paycheck, paid vacations, good job. Security was important to me. But in that moment, for the first time, something else was more important than security or comfort. So I was bound and determined to figure out how to be my own boss.
It sounds to me like you're saying that the pain of staying where you were was worse than the pain that you imagined if you reached for something, even if you failed.
At the moment, if you asked me, Amy, this was 15 years ago, were you prepared to fail? I'd probably say, oh gosh, Dr. Phil, I don't know. That's like a big question. I don't know if I was ready in that moment, but I did know that what was keeping me safe was keeping me stuck. I just knew that there was something in that moment. I thought, I'm watching these guys, and if these guys can do it, there was a tiny little courage voice inside me thought, if these guys can do it, I can figure this out. Like, come on, there's got to be a way. And so when I realized, wait a second, I feel stuck. I never see my husband. I'm always on the road. I've hit a glass ceiling. I know I can make more money than what I'm going to make here. There's got to be another way. So I think it was this desire for something more that I thought, okay, I'm willing to take a risk. Now, here's the thing. The reason I wrote the book 2 Weeks Notice is I don't think that some woman in a 9-to-5 job is going to have a moment like, you know what? I got to be my own boss. Let's go. And she gives her 2 weeks notice tomorrow. That's not how it happens. what I had to do is I had to build a runway. And I talk about this in the book, where there were things that I had to make calculated moves in order to be ready. It took me a full year from that fateful meeting to actually driving out of those San Diego offices in my little white car with my back of my car packed with all my boxes from my office and drive out into the sunset. It took me a full year, and I did it scared. Like, I did not do it fully confident. But again, I think the pain of staying was bigger than the comfort of being there. And so I think that is something that anybody listening right now, ask yourself, what do you want? I think the reason we stay stuck is we don't even know what we want. What do you want? I didn't want to be told what to do, when to do, or how to do it anymore. I didn't want to be on someone else's time or someone else's dime. I didn't want to be bossed around anymore. It was like finally hit me. And that kind of energy, that kind of like fierceness in me, it took a little while to me to get the courage to leave, but I really do think we have to kind of dig that up.
Once you get there, once you do break the code, once you do figure out what that formula is that resonates with people, connects with people, and you find out the value that they're looking for and you deliver that, then not that you don't have to evolve with the time, but now you have created what I call consequential knowledge. You have knowledge that is consequential and you uniquely own that. Somebody can't come and do that without you. And that makes you truly in business for yourself.
I was about 3 years into my business and I thought I had unbossed myself. I thought I was a good boss and leading the way. And then I was presented from a peer of mine to become a partner in my business. So I had almost hit $1 million year. And this guy who was younger than me, who was really strategic and smart, he said, Amy, I've got an idea. Why don't you make me a 50-50 partner and we can explode this business you've created? And I was friends with him for a while. And Dr. Phil, I would love to tell you that it took me weeks to make a decision. I'd love to tell you I consulted lawyers. I talked to my husband. We went over it. I'd like to tell you all that happened. It took one night of sleep. And I said yes to this guy. Yes, you can have 50% of my business, because yet again, I was scared that I couldn't make it on my own. And I don't want to go too deep into this because you could give me some therapy like that. Believe me, I've had a lot, but I've always thought that I needed a man. I thought that I needed a man to help me make decisions. And, it started with my dad and then all these male bosses. And so here's this guy saying, I see potential in you, Amy. You could be huge, but let me help you. And I went right back into my old habits of thinking I can't do it alone. And so I said yes. And for years, we made millions together. This business really took off until about 3 or 4 years in. And I looked in the mirror and thought, I don't even know who I am. I have let this guy become my boss. And it was no fault to him. I did this, but I went right back into, are you proud of me? Am I doing a good job? And when the business wasn't working, what do we do? What should we do? Help me, give me advice. Like, I lost myself again. And I had already become an entrepreneur with almost $1 million business. And so when I realized, wait a second, I've literally went back into employee mode, I had to snap myself out of it really quickly. So the story I didn't want to tell in the book that I did tell is what it took to get me out of that situation. I literally almost lost my entire business because we almost had to dissolve it. Now, the reason I bring this up is because what you said, there was a moment that I was so weak and I almost gave all of it up. And then I remembered, wait a second, I know how to make money online. I've done this. So you can burn this down and I am going to build it back up. And that was the first time I think I've ever felt incredibly confident in my abilities because I had done it. And if you take this away from me, I will do it again. So fast forward, and I talk about in the book how I got out of it. And from the time I got out of it till a year later, I went from $5 million in my business to $16.5 million in a year. And I believe it's because it was the first time that I stepped into, wait a second, no one's coming to save me. I am going to figure this out. And I have officially started to believe in myself. That's how powerful it can be. And that's why I had to write the book. I want more women to step into that. I'm not unique. I'm very insecure in many, many ways. But when I realized, wait a second, I got this, burn it down, I'll build it back better, is when I stepped into it.
Yeah. And at that point, you've just made a decision. Hey, I do know something that is not common knowledge. And this is what I mean by consequential knowledge. And I tell people, that if you want to succeed in this life, you need to develop consequential knowledge. If you can be replaced with what you're doing to make money in 2 hours, if you work at McDonald's, which is a legitimate job, I'm not putting that down. I'm just saying, if you can be replaced in 2 hours, then you don't have consequential knowledge. But if you are a computer repair tech, if you are a brain surgeon, if you have a unique business and talent for creating content and marketing on the internet, whatever it might be, if that's something that if you leave, they can't replace you in a short period of time, you have consequential knowledge. What you know is consequential to your life and their business, then all of a sudden you're not working for minimum wage anymore. Now you're bringing something to the table that people need and they're willing to pay for that.
Yes.
When you said, hey, burn it down, I can build it back because I've got that information, that's when you become independent.
Absolutely. And that's when life begins to change. So when you think about let's say you're in a 9-to-5 job and you're listening right now and you look around and you think this cannot be it. There's got to be something better for me. I cannot stay here much longer. The first thought is I'm going to quit and get another 9-to-5 job. But when you build that kind of knowledge that you talk about, and this is something you can do over time, I have no doubt in my mind, you never turn back. Like, can you imagine, Dr. Phil, ever turning back and working for somebody else? Can you even imagine at this point?
It just wouldn't work. I mean,
it wouldn't work. Exactly. Now, you're different than me, and you probably always had that gene of like, I'm going to be my own boss and I'm going to lead. Like, well, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever had a boss?
The last job I had was for Hallmark cards in my junior year of high school.
I had a feeling. Okay, so you're definitely a rarity where you probably never were meant to have a boss. But for those listening, I was absolutely meant to have a boss and I was really good at it. But I didn't realize when I didn't have a boss anymore, you will never, ever go back. There's nothing in you. When you get a taste of freedom of being your own boss, you will never, ever let anybody walk all over you, decide when you can take a vacation, when you can get a raise. All of that becomes like, no, that's not part of my story. So I just am here to prove that it is absolutely possible to move from employee to boss over time. It's just one decision at a time.
And I want to say at the same time, not all bosses are evil.
I totally agree. Yes.
Whether they're male or female, young or old, whatever, not all bosses are evil. Entrepreneurship is not for everyone. I spend a lot of time working in the legal profession. There are lawyers that are cut out to be contingency fee plaintiff lawyers, where they might work on a case for 3 years and not make a dime and then make $38 million. And then there are lawyers that work on the defense side where they get paid an hourly fee. They know what it's going to be. They'll never make the $38 million, but they have the security of knowing they're going to get paid every month. One side is not for everybody, and the other side is not for everybody. Different personalities fit different things. But if you hear that call of wanting to be in business for yourself, wanting to chart your own course, once you do it, you burn the ships in the harbor. There is no going back.
I agree that entrepreneurship is not for everybody. I have a sister who's a second grade teacher that never in her wildest dreams does she want my life. She thinks my life is crazy compared to her life. And so she is never going to do this. However, when I looked around personally and realized this is not what I want, it didn't mean I had to hate the life I had. It's just that I had bigger aspirations for me. So some people listening, you don't have to be miserable to go after bigger dreams. You just have to get clear on what you want. And I think that it does kind of change things a little bit for some.
Yeah, I think it's so important that people define what success looks like and feels like for them, because the worst thing in the world I think you could do is succeed at the wrong thing. Can you imagine spending your whole life and becoming the best accountant ever to account? And then you get at the end and say, my God, I have become the supreme accountant on the planet, and I wanted to be a guitar player.
Oh,
I mean,
exactly.
How miserable would that be?